Three sounds carved the dawn: a splash of oars, the crack of a musket being cocked, and a single guttural laugh from a captain who will soon vanish from history. Minutes later, a lone figure stands ankle-deep in the surf, watching his ship glide away without him. His name is Alexander Selkirk, though the world will not know that for years. Within his seabed chest lie two books and one object that will decide whether he dies before winter. Why did he demand to be left here, 400 miles from the nearest coast? What secret inside the ship's hull could force such a wager? Keep those questions in your mind. The answers ripple through every step he takes on this forsaken rock. A rebel in search of limits. Fife, Scotland, offered young Alexander two futures: scrape hides in his father's tannery or drown in mischief until the Kirk hauled him to court. He sampled both. He once drank seawater on a dare, staggered into church, and erupted in laughter loud enough to stop the sermon. Punishment rolled off his shoulders because a sharper thrill always beckoned. Despite the chaos, he devoured mathematics, memorizing logarithms and star charts instead of psalms. Every lesson whispered the same promise. Beyond the horizon waited a blank ledger on which even a seventh son could write his own value. When privateers recruiting for the war against Spain dropped anchor in Leith, Selkirk signed before dinner. Piracy under a flag of convenience was a gamble, but one he could measure in degrees and knots. He mastered the sextant, the backstaff, and the quill, charting courses other helmsmen feared to trace. Each successful raid expanded his reputation and his arrogance in equal measure. Fault lines on the Cinque Ports. By 1704, Selkirk served as sailing master aboard the Cinque Ports, a patch brigantine paired with William Dampier's flagship. Scurvy had already carved a chair for itself at the officers' table, and Spanish coastal guns had begun to answer every British broadside with deadly accuracy. When Lieutenant Thomas Stradling assumed command after the former captain's death, authority on deck became a tug-of-war wrapped in hemp. Selkirk's charts said one thing: the hull needed care before they crossed another league of blue water. Stradling's ego said another: patchwork was enough. During a supply stop at Massa Tierra, Selkirk inspected the keel and saw shipworms lacing the planks like termites in a coffin lid. He warned Stradling that the next gale could turn the brig into driftwood, then raise the stakes. Fix her properly, or set me ashore until you do. He expected capitulation. Instead, Stradling accepted the wager at face value. Beach of no return. The longboat grounded. Sailors offloaded a chest, bedding, musket, powder horn, hatchet, knife, tobacco, Bible, and two navigation manuals. No one met Selkirk's gaze. The captain's orders were simple: leave him, return to duty. Oars dipped, wake foamed, and then nothing. He stood in a silence that rang louder than cannon fire. Shouting hurt his throat and did not bend the horizon. Hunger arrived by afternoon, thirst by dusk. The beach offered limpets and a trickle of fresh water seeping from stone, but it also promised an approaching season when bull sea lions would claim every grain of sand. He turned inland as darkness pooled between pimento trees. The open loops widen. Will hunger break him before solitude does? What use is a sextant without a ship, raising a palace from scraps? High in the forest he cut saplings, wove lianas, and raised a hut tight enough to cheat the rain. Nights brought a new terror. Rats poured over the floorboards, gnawing boots and skin. Paw prints around the clearing suggested a cure. Ships that stopped here in earlier years had left feral cats. Selkirk coaxed kittens with crab meat, bred them, and soon slept beneath a living ceiling of feline guardians. The rats retreated, the cats stayed. One problem solved. Routine became religion. He rose with first light, recited a psalm aloud to prove his voice still worked, then tracked wild goats across ravines so steep that any slip meant oblivion. Goat meat simmered in his iron kettle. Hides became leggings stitched with sinew. Tendons turned to bowstrings. Fat sealed cracks in leather water bags. He discovered cabbage palm cores that roasted like bread and watercress bright enough to scour scurvy from the blood. Every evening he reviewed the sky as if still responsible for a ship, plotting imaginary courses to imaginary harbors. Cliff-edge consequences. Confidence swelled until the island reminded him who ruled. In the second year, he chased a massive billy goat along a cliff, lunged, and fell. The goat cushioned his landing but died. Selkirk cracked ribs and lay for days breathing through a straw-thin gap in the pain. Only stubbornness dragged him back to his hut. Recovery forced reflection. If cliffs or infection claimed him, his story would rot with him. He began carving name and date into tree trunks around the island, a breadcrumb trail of identity for any future stranger. Ships that were not salvation. Twice Spanish galleons anchored for wood. Selkirk buried his campfire, slipped into brush, and watched patrols march the beach. A musket ball whistled past his ear when a lookout glimpsed movement. He held still inside a fig tree while unfamiliar voices debated whether the island held prisoners or ghosts. When they left, they took a dozen of his goats and the illusion that rescue, any rescue, was worth cheering. Capture meant chains, not freedom. Signal to the right sails. On a humid morning in February 1709, Selkirk spied two topsails on the horizon. Through his spyglass, the flags looked English. He sprinted to the beach and piled driftwood high, feeding the beacon with every scrap of dry branch until a pillar of smoke clawed the clouds. Night fell, and still he stoked the blaze. Dawn found the Duke and Duchess sending a boat ashore. Sailors expected hidden Spaniards. Instead, they confronted a lean man in goatskin brandishing a scrap of white cloth and a grin as wide as the bay. Captain Woodes Rogers listened to the tale, sized up Selkirk's athletic frame and precise star readings, and appointed him second mate on the spot. During the passage around Cape Horn, Selkirk proved he could slice days off a voyage by reading currents with uncanny intuition. Prize money awaited in England, but the greater treasure for Selkirk was conversation that answered back. Echoes in print and memory. London printers devoured the saga. Broadsheets dubbed him the king of the desert isle, while coffeehouse raconteurs inflated details to mythic scale. Daniel Defoe, itching for a new novel, soaked up every anecdote. 8 years later, Robinson Crusoe strode into bookstores, a shadow wearing Selkirk's goatskins. The real man married, bought a share in a vessel, then drifted back to sea service. In 1721, yellow fever caught him off the coast of Africa. On his deathbed, he whispered that no pile of coin, no commendation from admirals, ever equaled the strange contentment of nights on Massa Tierra when wind through pimento leaves sounded like a distant choir, and every decision, for better or worse, belonged solely to him. The loops tie tight. What hull grumble drove him to demand exile? Months after Selkirk's marooning, Cinque Ports sprang a leak near Columbia, exactly as he predicted, and foundered. Survivors fell into Spanish hands. Stradling spent years in brutal captivity, shackled by the very denial that stranded his navigator. The secret Selkirk heard in the timbers was simple: woodworms do not respect pride. His gamble saved his life while dragging his enemies under. Islands within. Selkirk's 4 winters alone prove that resilience blooms where structure takes root. He replaced society with schedule, conversation with self-interrogation, weakness with makeshift inventions. He turned predators into partners, cliffs into gyms, wood smoke into semaphore. Isolation sharpened his craft, not dulled it. His story invites one question to linger long after the video fades to black. If tomorrow your ship sailed without you, which instinct would surface first, despair or design? Remember the open loops that guided us here. Why he stayed, how he endured, and what price the others paid. Now close them yourself. Light a fire in your imagination the way Selkirk lit his on that dark shore, and ask whether the smoke you send up today might steer your own rescue, or reveal that you never needed one at all.